Hi, I'm David. Welcome to A Tale. Once a week on this channel, we tell a true story from history, the kind I stay up too late reading about, told slow enough to fall asleep to. Tonight it is the story of Mansa Musa of Mali, the man so wealthy that when he passed through Cairo, giving gold away, the city remembered it for a dozen years. And I will tell you right at the start that this story ends gently. He makes the whole journey there and back, every mile of it, comes home safe to his river and his throne, reigns in peace for about a quarter of a century, and the things he built with all that gold, the mosques, the schools, the libraries full of books, outlived every coin of it. Some of those books can still be read today. Everything you will hear comes from the old chroniclers and the historians who test the legends, and the sources are listed below. There are no ads waiting to wake you. Before we begin, one quiet word. If these nights help you sleep, subscribe now, while your eyes are still open, and tomorrow night will be waiting for you when you need it. A like helps other tired travelers find this fire. That is the whole ask. So settle in, get warm, and let an old story keep you company. Good night. Close your eyes now, if you like. This is a story, and it is true. And it asks nothing of you, except that you lie still and let it happen. And before we begin it, let me give you the ending, so that you can hold it the whole way through, the way you hold a rail on a dark stair. Tonight the ending is one of the good ones. There was once a king in West Africa, so rich that no one, in his own century or in ours, has ever managed to count his wealth. He ruled an empire of gold and salt and slow brown rivers, a country so broad that a traveler needed months to cross it. And in the year 1324, he did a thing kings almost never do. He left. He walked out of his own legend and went on a journey, a pilgrimage across the widest desert on earth to the holy city of Mecca, thousands of miles there and thousands back, with a caravan so vast that the cities he passed through never forgot it. And here's the whole ending, up front, where this fireside always keeps it. He made it, every mile, there and back. No storm took him, no enemy touched him, no sand swallowed his caravan. He gave away gold in Cairo until the price of gold itself sagged under the weight of his generosity. And then, because even his purse had a bottom, he ran short on the way home and borrowed like any traveler and laughed his way out of that too. He came home to his river and his throne, and he spent the rest of his reign, about a quarter of a century in all, building mosques, schools, a famous audience hall painted by a poet, and in a city called Timbuktu, at the desert's edge, the thing he planted grew into one of the great homes of learning on this earth, a city of scholars and libraries whose books, hundreds of thousands of them, survive to this very night. The gold he scattered is gone into the world's bloodstream, untraceable, the way gold always goes. The book stayed. That is the ending. The richest man who ever lived is remembered less for what he had than for what he left, and what he left is still there, and it can still be read. So hold that. Nothing in this story can go wrong. Every dune in it, every market, and every mile of river run safe home to a shelf of books in a quiet room. You know the harbor. The caravan comes home. And one thing more, because it is the reason this story, of all stories, belongs to bedtime. The great caravans of the Sahara did their truest traveling at night. The day out there belonged to the sun, and the wise traveler yielded it, resting under awnings through the white hours. It was in the cool of the dark that the caravans rose and moved, mile after gentle mile, steering by the stars the way sailors steer, for the desert is an ocean, and its guides knew the night sky as a shepherd knows his own hillside. Every star over your roof tonight stood over that caravan too. So as you drift, let the house around you be the camp. The fire is low, the loads are stacked, the animals are settled, and the road of stars is doing all the work. Nobody has to walk tonight. Tonight the caravan rests. Let the story take its time now. It has an empire to cross, and it is in no hurry, and neither are you. Begin with the river, because the country begins with the river. Across the inside of West Africa runs one of the great rivers of the world, the Niger, and it does a strange and generous thing. It rises in green highlands, not far from the Atlantic, and instead of running the short way down to the sea, it turns its back on the ocean and flows inland, northeast, into the dry country, toward the desert, as if it had somewhere better to be. And partway along that journey it relaxes, spreads itself out across the flat land, and becomes a country of its own. A vast inland delta of channels and lakes and islands, green in the flood season, silver under the moon, loud with birds. Herders walked their cattle along its margins. Farmers grew rice in its wet fields. Whole peoples lived by its fish, and towns stood up out of its plains, round earthen houses and granaries on stilts, and among them a city called Jannah, market of the middle river. The river gave so much and ran so far that the learned geographers of Cairo and Fez, working from travelers' reports, decided it must be the Nile itself, wandering over from Egypt by some secret way. It was not. But you can hear in that mistake how big the river felt to the people who tried to describe it. Along that river, in the centuries before our story, an empire had grown. The old songs, which in that country are a profession and an inheritance, tell how it began. How in the 1230s, a prince called Sundiata Keita, the Lion of Mali, rose against a harsh overlord called Sumanguru, and broke his power at the Battle of Karina, and gathered the lands of the Mandi people into one realm. We know the shape of that beginning from the griots, the Jelai as their own country calls them, the hereditary rememberers, families whose calling for 700 years and more has been to keep the past alive out loud, by the fire, with a harp of gourd and strings. And it pleases me more than I can say that tonight, on the far side of the world, by this fire, we are doing their kind of work. The ruler of that realm took the title Mansa, which in the Mande tongue means something like King of Kings. There would be many Mansas. Our story belongs to the 9th or 10th of them, more or less, for even the king lists disagree a little, the way old family stories do. Now, the wealth. It is real, and it is worth understanding, because it is not a dragon's hoard in a cave. It is geography, and it is patience. South and west of the upper river, in wooded valleys, lay the gold fields, the two famous ones called Bambouk and Bure. The gold there did not have to be chased down mine shafts a mile deep. It lay in the earth and the gravel of old streams, and country people worked it in the dry season, digging pits, washing the sand in wide wooden basins, gathering the bright flecks the water gave up. Season after season, generation after generation, an unhurried harvest of shining dust. The Mansas never needed to own every basin. The custom of the realm did something shrewder. Nuggets, the rare heavy pieces, belonged to the king, and the dust flowed through trade, taxed gently as it passed. So the king's treasury filled the way a delta fills, not by seizing the river, but by being the place the river runs through. And here is the half of the story the legends always forget. The empire's other treasure was salt. Far to the north, deep in the true desert, at a place called the Gaza, Salt lay under the sand in beds, and it was cut like building stone, in great pale slabs the size of tabletops, and loaded to a camel and carried south for weeks, to the river, where people needed it the way all people need it, for life itself, and for keeping food alive. In the green south, salt was the precious thing, and travelers swore that in some far corners of the trade, it changed hands for his weight in gold. Gold moving north, salt moving south, cloth and copper, and books and news, moving both ways, and every road of that trade, crossing the Mansa's country, and paying its respects as it passed. That was Mali, not a pile of treasure, a crossroads, run wisely, for a very long time. Cairo, hearing all this from a great distance, embroidered it, the way distance always embroiders. There were people in Egypt, a chronicler admits, who believed that in Mali gold grew out of the ground like a crop, sprouting after the rains, harvested like carrots. It did not, of course, but when a country is that rich and that far away, the stories lean toward the marvelous. And this is the first of many times tonight you will hear the legend outrun the truth. We will always tell you which is which. That is the house promise. And the truth, patient basins of river sand, slabs of salt on camelback, tolls taken gently at the crossroads of half a continent, is, as usual, the better story. Musa came to the throne around the year 1312, and the story of how is one of the strangest and loveliest in the whole history of kingship, and the best part is the source of it. We have it from Musa himself. Years later, in Cairo, at the height of his fame, Musa befriended an Egyptian official, a governor named Ibn Amir Hajib, and the two men talked often, and the governor asked him plainly, "How did you come to rule?" And Musa told him, and the governor repeated it to a scholar named Umari, who wrote it down, which is why we can still hear it. This is what Musa said. The king before him did not believe it was impossible to reach the far side of the ocean, the great green Atlantic that beat on the empire's western edge. He wanted to know what was over there, wanted it the way some men want gold or glory, and he fitted out 200 vessels filled with men, and as many again filled with gold and water and provisions to last for years, and sent them west into the open sea, with orders not to return until they had found the ocean's end or spent the last of their supplies. And they were gone a long time, and at last one vessel came back, only one, and its captain stood before the king and told what he had seen, how the fleet had sailed on and on until it met what he could only call a river in the middle of the sea, a mighty current with a violent pull, and how the ships ahead of him entered it one by one and did not come out, and how he alone had turned back from the edge of it and run for home. The king did not believe him, or perhaps could not afford to, so he did an astonishing thing. He prepared a second fleet, 2,000 vessels this time, 1,000 for the men, and 1,000 for water and stores, and this time he took command himself. He put on his finest robes, appointed Musa deputy of the realm, to keep the throne warm until his return, and sailed west with his fleet into the Atlantic. And that, said Musa, standing in Cairo in the fullness of his power, was the last that anyone ever saw of him and all who were with him, and so I became king in my own right. That is the whole account, one paragraph in an old book, and it is the only one there is. The chronicler who wrote it down never even recorded the vanished king's name. Later storytellers came to call him Abu Bakr II, though the old king lists suggest the man before Musa was actually called Muhammad, and historians have puzzled over the knot ever since. Some have dreamed the fleet across the whole ocean to the Americas. There is no evidence of that, no landing remembered on any far shore, and we will not pretend otherwise. The ocean kept what happened. All we truly have is what Musa said, a king who looked at the horizon until he could not bear it, 2,000 sails going out into the west, and a deputy standing on the shore, watching, who would wear the crown for the rest of his life. I will not pretend to know what it does to a man to inherit a kingdom that way, from a predecessor who might, for all anyone knew, someday sail back. But it is hard not to notice the shape of what Musa did with his reign. The old king had poured the kingdom's daring into the empty west and vanished. Musa turned the other way. He looked east, toward Mecca, toward the center of his faith and the great cities of the world, along roads that were hard but known, roads with wells and markets and names. His would be the other kind of great journey, the kind you come back from. He was a devout Muslim, as his father's people had been for generations, though his empire held many faiths and he ruled all of them. And the pilgrimage to Mecca, which every Muslim who is able is called to make once, had been made by Mansa before him, quietly, modestly. Musa began to prepare for one that would not be quiet or modest. It would be the journey of the age. And one small thing before the caravan gathers, a gift for the regulars at this fireside. His name, Musa, is simply the Arabic form of an older name you know very well, Moses. This hearth has told the story of an American Moses already, a small woman who crossed her wilderness on foot in the dark. Tonight belongs to a Moses who crossed his in gold. History does not repeat itself, but it does seem to have favorite names. A king does not pack a bag. A king packs a country. For months, perhaps years, the order went out along the rivers and the roads. The Mansa goes to Mecca. Grain was gathered and dried, herds driven in, the smiths worked, and the leather workers and the weavers, sandals by the thousand, water skins by the thousand, tents, harness, rope. Gold came up from the treasury and from the trading families called the Wangara, whose business was gold dust and whose word was good from the forest country to the desert's edge, and was packed for travel, sewn into hides, a fortune divided into camel-sized pieces. Deputies took their instructions, for the empire would stay home and be governed. And out of every town, along the middle river, people came to watch the impossible thing assemble, the way people always will. How big was it, in the end, the caravan of the year 1324? Here, the house rule earns its keep. Nobody stood by the road and counted. The men who wrote the numbers down were in Cairo, or were writing generations later, and what they recorded was the awe, not the arithmetic. The chroniclers speak of 60,000 people on the march, of 12,000 servants and enslaved attendants, of 500 who walked ahead of the king, each carrying a staff of gold, of 80 camels, or 100, loaded with gold dust, 300 pounds to the camel. Historians treat such round numbers the way you treat a fisherman's arm spread wide, as testimony that the fish was very large indeed. Even if the truth was a fraction of the figures, and it likely was, this was one of the great peaceful processions of the Middle Ages, and the cities it visited talked about it for a century. And one thing must be said plainly. Once, because this fireside does not decorate the past, among the thousands who walked were enslaved men and women, people who made every one of those miles without ever being asked. Mali held slaves, as Egypt did, as nearly every kingdom of that century did, on every continent, and no honest accounting of this journey or this wealth leaves those walkers out. They crossed the same desert under the same stars, and carried more than their share of it. And when you picture the caravan tonight, picture them in it, with their dignity, which no ledger of that age or this one ever managed to take away. The royal household traveled too. The later chronicles of Timbuktu remember that the king's senior wife, Inari Conti, made the whole pilgrimage at his side, with her own attendants, her own tents, her own place in the line of march. Picture her there, a queen of Mali on the road to Mecca, unhurried, the desert making room. So there it stood at last, on some morning we have no date for, drawn up in the cool before dawn, the loads lashed, the drivers at their tea, the guides watching the sky, banners hanging still in the last of the night air. Somewhere in the middle of it, a king in his prime, brown-skinned and pleasant-faced and unhurried, the witnesses in Cairo would remember, said his prayers, and mounted, and the whole slow city began to move. It moved at the pace of its slowest camel, which is the only pace a caravan has, about the pace of a man walking to no appointment. It would keep that pace for thousands of miles, and so will we. Understand what they were walking into, and why it was not madness. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on earth, but the caravan roads across it were not adventures. They were highways, old and known and kept. For centuries, the trade had gone back and forth along them, and the desert peoples who guided the crossings, the veiled traders of the sands, knew every well and every dune field the way a ferryman knows his river. A crossing was managed in stages, from the river towns north to Walata, the desert's front porch, where the loads were checked and the water reckoned. Then the long haul, well to well, each one a little harbor spaced by 10,000 years of knowledge. The guide steered by the stars, and some, the travelers swore, by the smell of the sand itself. They rested through the heat of the day, under awnings, as we said at the beginning, and in the late afternoon, the camp would stir, and load, and walk out into the night. See it now, slowly, because this is the picture the whole night is built around. A column of thousands, moving without hurry across starlit sand, no sound but feet and harness, and the low complaint of a camel. The sky enormous, blue-black, rivered with stars from horizon to horizon. A lantern swinging from the lead camel, one warm point of light in all that silver. Ahead somewhere, Mecca. Behind somewhere, home. And nothing to do, for 100 nights together, except walk gently on beneath the wheeling sky and trust the guides who had never yet been wrong. Part way across, they came to a place you already know, Tagaza, the town of salt. A generation later, the traveler Ibn Battuta, of whom much more soon, passed through and wrote down what he could hardly believe. A town where the houses themselves and the mosque were built of blocks of salt, roofed with camel skins, white under the sun and whiter under the moon. Nothing grew there. Every mouthful arrived by caravan, and out of that hard, bright outpost, slab by slab, traveled the mineral that seasoned the suppers of half of West Africa. The caravan watered and rested and moved on, and the salt town went back to its patient work behind them. And in this fashion, stage by stage, month by month, the moving city crossed the ocean of sand and came down into the green ribbon of the Nile, into Egypt. In the summer of 1324, some 3,000 walked miles from home. And there, at the desert's edge on the west bank of the river, the caravan made camp in sight of 3 mountains built by men. The pyramids of Giza, already nearly 4,000 years old, on the night Musa's fires were lit beneath them. The king of the newest great power on the caravan roads slept in the shadow of the oldest. History loves an arrangement like that, and so does this fireside, and we will leave them asleep a moment while we tell Cairo what is coming. Cairo in 1324 was one of the wonders of the world. It was the seat of the Mamluk sultans, the capital of Egypt and Syria together, a city of perhaps 500,000 souls, when London held a tenth of that, a city of domes and minarets, of covered markets running for miles, of colleges and libraries, of ships on the Nile, and caravans at the gates. Cairo had seen everything. Cairo was quite sure it had seen everything. And then, in the month of July, the king of Mali came to town, and Cairo spent the next 12 years discussing it. We know what happened there with unusual confidence. And the why is one of the quiet heroes of this episode. About 12 years after the visit, a scholar named Umari came to live in Cairo, compiling a kind of encyclopedia of the whole world as Islam knew it. And he went around the city interviewing everyone who had known the king of Mali, the officials who hosted him, the courtiers who watched him, the merchants who traded with him, and wrote down what they said, including the things that flattered nobody. Nearly everything solid we know about Musa in Cairo comes through that one careful man asking questions while the memories were still warm. People who write things down are the reason we can have stories that are true. Here is what the witnesses told him. The king of Mali gave. He gave the way weather happens, evenly, everywhere, without seeming to keep track. There was no officer of the Sultan's court, they said, no keeper of any office, high or low, who did not receive his sum of gold from the visitor. He gave to the poor at the mosque doors, to hosts and strangers, to scholars and servants, and his people spent besides, buying everything a moving city needs, and a great deal it did not, and paying whatever was asked. And the merchants of Cairo, being merchants of Cairo, noticed, and Al-Umari's informants admitted it with a wince you can still hear across 7 centuries. The bazaar saw the travelers coming, and charged them 5 for what was worth 1, and the travelers, rich beyond bargaining, cheerfully paid. So much gold came into the city, in that one season, the witnesses said, that gold itself grew humble. The mythkal, the standard gold measure of the markets, sagged and cheapened, and by Al-Umari's account, it had still not fully recovered when he was asking a question some 12 years on. That story, one visitor, cheapening gold itself for a decade, is the seed of every richest man who ever lived, headline you have ever read. Now, the house promise, gently kept. Modern historians who have sifted the surviving money records of Egypt find the truth a little quieter than the telling. The 12-year bruise was likely shorter and shallower than the merchants remembered, the way a famous storm grows in the memory of the town it soaked. That a flood of gold arrived, nobody doubts. But an economy is a river, not a bathtub, and it closed over even this. Hold both halves, because together they are the true marvel. Not that one man broke the price of gold, but that one man, from a kingdom most of Cairo could not have pointed to, gave on such a scale that the story was still worth checking 12 years later, and still worth telling 700 years later, at a fireside, to you. Of course, the Sultan of Egypt wished to meet him. This proved complicated, and the complication is the best comedy in the tale, and every word of it is from Al-Umari's interviews. The Sultan was Al-Nasir Muhammad, third reign, a proud and able man who expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. Etiquette at his court was exact. A visitor received an audience kissed the ground before the throne, or at the least the sultan's hand. Kings had done it. It was not negotiable. It had never needed to be. Musa did not want to go. He said so, politely, repeatedly, through intermediaries. He had come for the pilgrimage, he explained, and for nothing else, and did not wish to mix his holy journey with the visits of kings. The court pressed. He declined. The court pressed again, patiently. The official whose whole profession was the management of important guests would not be refused, and at last Musa, cornered by hospitality, consented to come to the citadel. And there the two great protocols of two great empires met and jammed, like two dignified gentlemen in a narrow doorway. The chamberlains indicated that the king of Mali would now kiss the ground. The king of Mali indicated that the king of Mali would do no such thing. He was a Mansa, a king of kings, lord of the gold and the salt and the river. South of the desert, when men approached him, they dusted their own heads in respect. The courtiers insisted. He demurred. The moment stretched, and the whole splendid room, one imagines, began quietly to perspire. Then Musa found the door out, and it was worthy of him. Very well, he said, in effect, I will make my prostration to God who created me. And he bowed himself down before his Maker in the sight of the throne, and every requirement in the room was satisfied at once. The sultans, the Mansas, and heavens. It is on record that Al-Nasir Muhammad, no man's fool, rose to greet him, seated the king of Mali beside him as an equal, and conversed with him at length through an interpreter, two men at the top of the world comparing notes on it. The sultan gave robes of honor, horses, provisions, lodgings befitting a king. Musa gave gold in quantities, the treasury noted with respect. Everyone had bowed to exactly no one. Diplomacy has rarely been done better, and nobody's dignity lost so much as a thread. When the pilgrimage season came round in the autumn, the caravan moved again, east out of Cairo, with the great official pilgrim train of Egypt, down the long hot corridor of the Hejaz toward Mecca, and on that road of roads, an old and beautiful leveling took hold even of the richest man alive. Pilgrims put off their finery and wrapped themselves in plain white cloth, so that no one can tell the king from the camel driver, which is precisely the idea. Somewhere on that road, the man who could bend the gold market of Cairo folded away his robes and became one white garment among tens of thousands, a pilgrim called Musa, walking. We will not follow him into the sanctuary. The rites of the Hajj are his, and his faith's, and bedtime does not need to peer at them. See the picture the old books give us. Pilgrims from every country of the known world, and now, magnificently, from the far side of the Sahara too, tens of thousands in identical white in the dusk of the plain of Arafat, kings indistinguishable from cooks. He did the thing he had crossed the world to do, and the books, and the mosques, and everything that fills the last third of this story came out of that valley with him. And now, the purse, and the most human fact in this whole gilded legend. On the way home, the richest man who ever lived ran out of money. How could he not? He had given gold away across 3,000 miles, like a man watering a garden. He had paid Cairo prices at the Cairo markup for a year, and the desert does not take promises, for a returning caravan must be provisioned as deep as an outgoing one. So the accounts tell us, with a straight face that keeps slipping, that the king of Mali, back in Cairo and waiting for the road home, was obliged to borrow at whatever terms were offered, and the terms offered to a king in a hurry were, let us say, not charitable. One great merchant of the day, a man named Siraj al-Din ibn al-Kuwaik, features in the records as a principal lender, and his family kept the memory of the sums for generations. And here's why the story survives with a smile instead of a smirk. He paid it all back. Home in Mali, with his treasury around him again, Musa repaid his lenders in full, and by the account that reached the chroniclers, he repaid like a king, generously past the terms, so that lending to the Mansa of Mali turned out to have been the best business in Cairo after all. Gold ran out, even his word did not. The chroniclers made very sure to tell us which one the merchants of Cairo came to prize. One more traveler joined the caravan at Mecca, and he matters more to this story than any load of gold on any camel. Among the pilgrims that season was a poet and man of letters from Granada, at the bright Spanish edge of the Muslim world, a man remembered as Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. Musa met him, liked him, and did the thing he had begun to do everywhere. He collected him. "Come to Mali," said the king, in effect. "My country has gold past counting, and what I want with it is men like you." And al-Sahili said yes. He was one of a number who said yes that year. Jurists, teachers, men of the Prophet's own line persuaded south with stipends and honors. But it is al-Sahili, the poet whose yes ended up standing in the skyline of a city. Keep him in view, riding somewhere in the column as it turns for home. A Granadan in the Sahara, humming something Andalusian, on his unhurried way to becoming West Africa's most famous builder. The road home was the road out, run backward, the desert, the wells, the stars, the months. And somewhere on it word came north to meet the king, and for once in the history of traveling kings, the news from home was good. His general had extended the empire's hand over the city of Gao, down the river's great bend, the old capital of the Songhai people, a prize of prizes. The empire had grown, while its king was at prayer. Musa turned aside to enter Gao and receive its submission with due ceremony, and marked the occasion in what was now, unmistakably, his signature. He ordered a mosque raised there. It was becoming the pattern of the reign, and it is the hinge of this entire tale, so let us say it plainly as the caravan walks its last miles home. The gold went out, and what came back was learning, and law, and books, and builders. Cairo kept the gold, Mali kept the change, and the change was worth more. He came home in the year 1325, after some 2 years and 7,000 miles, to the river and the throne, exactly as promised at the top of the story. And then, for the dozen years of reign remaining to him, he built. It is the part of the tale the legend usually hurries through, and the part that matters most, so we will take it at full fireside pace. Begin with the city, because you have been hearing its name all your life. Timbuktu sits at the exact meeting place of the two worlds this story has traveled between, the last reach of the river's floodplain and the first miles of the desert sand. It began, the old traditions say, as a seasonal camp by a well, and it grew because geography insisted, for here the camel met the canoe. Salt and cloth and books coming south across the sand, gold and grain and cola coming north along the water, everything changing hands at the port where the ocean of sand has its harbor. Musa took the city under Mali's wing, and gave it the two gifts a trading town cannot give itself: peace and prestige. The prestige had a shape, and the shape still stands: a great congregational mosque raised at Timbuktu. On his return, the Jingraber, the Friday Mosque, finished around 1327, and there it is to this day. 7 centuries later, one of the oldest buildings still in use in West Africa. It is built of the earth it stands on, mud brick and banco plaster, raised into thick, cool walls and forests of columns, with beams of wood left bristling from its sides in permanent rows. And the beams are not decoration, they are scaffolding that never comes down, so that after every rainy season, the town can climb its own mosque and replaster it by hand, palmful by palmful, the way you would care for a grandmother. A building of earth must be loved continuously, or it melts. This one has been loved continuously since the reign of Mansa Musa. When you hear that the mosque still stands, hear what you are really being told. The caring never stopped. Now, Al-Sahili, and a promise kept. Legend, in its generous way, came to credit the poet of Granada with designing everything Musa ever built, the Jingraber included. You will still find him named as the architect of half the Sahel. What the record actually holds is smaller and better. The historian Ibn Khaldun, of whom more in a moment, recorded what his informants knew, that Al-Sahili built for Musa a marvel at the capital, the river town the old tellings call Nayani, an audience chamber, domed, plastered, and painted in colors and patterns such as the country had not seen, and that the delighted king paid him 12,000 mithqals of gold dust for it. That is the documented Al-Sahili, not the father of a region's architecture, which had deep local roots and needed no import, but a brilliant guest who built one famous, beautiful room and was paid for it like a king's own poet. The legend gives him too much, the truth gives him exactly enough, and his bones, Ibn Battuta noted a generation later, rest in Timbuktu, in the city his patron loved, a poet from the far edge of Europe, buried honorably at the desert harbor of Africa. The 14th century was larger than most maps of it. And then there is the other mosque, the quieter one, from which the light really spread, Sankor. Around it, in the decades and centuries after Musa, gathered the thing Timbuktu is truly famous for, the scholars. Teaching there was not a single university with a gate and a bell. It was older and softer than that, a constellation of learned families and mosque circles, each master licensing his own students, in law, in grammar, in astronomy, in medicine, in the arts of the Quran. It is recorded of Timbuktu's great days that books were among the most profitable goods a merchant could carry there, that a scholar's library was his fortune and his monument, and the books were made to last, copied by hand on paper, carried across the desert, bound in tooled leather, wrapped in cloth, shelved in the cool dark of family houses, and passed down like land. Here is the fact to fall asleep on, the one the whole episode has been walking toward. Those books are still there, not figuratively, actually. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, the working libraries of Timbuktu and the river towns, survive to this very night, guarded for centuries by the same families, hidden in chests and cellars through every trouble, carried to safety on donkeys and in canoes within living memory, catalogued now and photographed and read by scholars from everywhere. Pages of astronomy with the planets' paths inked in red, legal opinions, love poems, medical recipes, letters. The paper outlived the gold. It always does. That is not a metaphor tonight. In Timbuktu, it is simply the inventory. Musa reigned on, building and endowing and governing, until about the year 1337, a quarter of a century in all, and then he died, as kings of Mali died, at home, in possession of his throne, and the succession moved quietly on, first to his son, and in a few years to his brother Suleiman, a careful, frugal man who kept the empire in good order. Even the king lists blur the exact year. In the courteous way, old records blur things, and we will not pretend to a precision. The 14th century did not leave us. What the records agree on is the shape. A long reign, a peaceful end, an empire handed on whole. In this fireside's catalog of kings, you would be surprised how rare that sentence is. Savor it. It is the harbor reached. And now the story stops being about the man and becomes about the light he threw. And we can watch that light arrive at 3 different windows. The first window belongs to a traveler. In 1352, a generation after the Hajj, the most traveled human being of the Middle Ages came to Mali to see it for himself. Ibn Battuta of Tangier had been on the road for nearly 30 years, from Spain to China. He had seen every court worth seeing on 3 continents, and he was, bless him, extremely hard to impress. He crossed the desert by Tagaza, complaining memorably about the food. He found the reigning Suleiman stingy with welcome gifts, and said so, in writing, forever, which is exactly why historians trust him. And this professional connoisseur of kingdoms recorded 2 things about Mali that outweigh every camel load of gold in this story. First, the roads were safe, utterly safe. A traveler there, he wrote, moved without fear, alone if he liked, and neither the traveler nor the man at home had anything to dread from robbers, across an empire months wide. Second, the justice was real, wrongdoing was rare, and was not tolerated in anyone, however great. He watched Friday crowds pack the mosque so thick that a boy had to be sent ahead with a prayer mat to hold a place, and children sat patiently to memorizing the Quran. And he went home and told the world that at the far side of the Sahara stood a great power where a stranger could sleep by the road in peace. That is what Musa's peace looked like from ground level, 20 years after his death, to the most experienced traveler alive. There are empires with 10 times Mali's fame in our school books that could not have passed that inspection for an afternoon. The second window belongs to a historian. Toward the end of the century, Ibn Khaldun, the greatest historical mind of his age, and one of the greatest of any age, set about his enormous history of the world. And when he came to Mali, he did what Umari had done. He found people who knew, learned men with connections at the Mali court, and asked and wrote down what could be established, the line of the Mansas in order, Sundiata to Musa, and past him. The deeds of each, the Al-Sahili story. Between Al-Umari's interviews, Ibn Battuta's boots on the ground, and Ibn Khaldun's king list, the empire of Mali stands in the record of the 14th century more solidly than many a European kingdom of the same year. Tonight's story has not been reconstructed from whispers. It was written down in its own century by the best minds available, checking their sources. When we promised you at the top that this was true, that promise had paperwork. And the third window belongs to a map maker, and it is the image the whole world now carries. In 1375, on the island of Majorca, a master chart maker named Abraham Cresques, of a celebrated Jewish family of map makers, finished the most beautiful map of the world the 14th century ever produced. We call it the Catalan Atlas, and it lies tonight in the National Library in Paris. There, in the heart of West Africa, where earlier maps had offered guesswork and monsters, Cresques painted a king, enthroned, crowned in gold, a gold scepter in one hand, and in the other, held up as if for the whole Mediterranean to inspect, a single enormous coin of pure gold. The caption names him, the Lord of the Black People of Guinea, called Musa Meli, the richest and most noble king in all the land, so abundant is the gold of his country. 50 years after the Hajj, drawn by a man who never saw him or his empire, there he sits, the news of one journey, fixed in ink and gold leaf on the finest map in Europe. Cairo talked, sailors carried the talk, and a king of Mali took his seat on the map of the world, holding up his coin like a lamp. Our own century has tried to finish the arithmetic the 14th gave up on. You may have met the headlines, adjusted for this and estimated for that. Mansa Musa was worth $400 billion, the richest human being in history. Historians wince at those numbers, and you can hear why by now. Nobody counted the caravan, nobody audited the gold fields, and a fortune made of rivers and salt and toll roads does not convert to dollars at any honest rate. The truthful answer, and the grander one, is the one his own century gave. His wealth could not be counted. That is not a failure of the records. That is the finding. And the one measure of him that can be counted precisely, to this day, sits on the shelves of Timbuktu, in tooled leather bindings, waiting for morning readers. So, let the story settle now, the way a caravan settles at dusk, load by load, fire by fire, into the warm sand, a river that turns its back on the ocean and makes a green country in the middle of the dry land, old songs by a courtyard fire, kept by families whose profession is remembering, basins of bright dust lifted patiently out of forest streams, and slabs of salt riding south on camelback like pale tabletops. A king who sailed west with 2,000 ships and never came back, and the quiet deputy who turned the kingdom's eyes the other way. A moving city assembling in the blue hour before dawn, a queen's tents somewhere in the line. The white hours rested away under awnings, and the cool hours walking beneath the sky, rivered with stars, one lantern swinging at the head of the column, a town built of salt, glowing under the moon, campfires burning small and orange beneath pyramids, already 4,000 years old, gold falling on Cairo like weather, and the bazaars charging 5 for 1 and being cheerfully paid. 2 kings in one lamplit room, neither able to bow, and a doorway found at last through heaven itself. Tens of thousands of pilgrims in identical white in the dusk of a desert plain, kings indistinguishable from cooks, an empty purse of all things, and loans repaid so royally that the lenders boasted of them for a generation. A poet of Granada, humming his way south across the Sahara, a domed and painted room worth 12,000 measures of gold, an earthen mosque with its scaffolding grown into its bones, loved and replastered for 700 years, a traveler who had seen everything, reporting in some astonishment that here, at last, the roads were safe, a historian in Cairo, writing down the king list, checking his sources, a map maker on an island in the Mediterranean, painting a black king on a golden throne at the heart of Africa, holding up a coin like a lamp, and in the cool dark of family houses at the desert's edge, shelf above shelf, the books, the red-inked planets and the poems and the letters, hundreds of thousands of them, kept safe by their city to this very night. The gold is gone. Go looking for Mansa Musa's fortune, and you will find nothing. It is in everything, melted into the world's long bloodstream of trade, centuries ago, past all tracing. Go looking for what he actually left, and you will find a mosque that is still swept, and books that are still read, and a name that still, 700 years on, means somewhere at the far edge of everything. There was a golden city of learning. Rich is what a man has. Wealth is what a man leaves that other people are still using. By that accounting, the title holds, and no one is ever likely to take it from him. The richest man who ever lived. And if the name Timbuktu has caught in your ear tonight, the way it has caught in the world's ear for 7 centuries, know that this fireside has kept a whole night in that city already, a night in Timbuktu, there in the catalog whenever you want it, waiting like a book on a shelf. Cities, like stories, keep. Your own day is done now too. Whatever it held, it is held. You do not have to carry it another mile tonight. The fire here is low and easy. The wind moves softly over the long sand. The camels are settled. The loads are stacked and counted. And nobody at all, has to walk tonight. Above your roof, behind whatever weather there is, the same river of stars that led the caravan is running quietly across the dark. The road of lights the guides never once misread. The desert is calm. The empire is at peace. The books are asleep on their shelves in Timbuktu, and the king came home, and the caravan rests. Sleep now. Good night. History will keep till morning.